Good morning, everybody. My name is Corey Rosen, and you are listening to the Story Podcast. Today, I have on with me a super awesome guest for the start of season two, Mrs. Katie Miller.
Good morning.
As the oldest grandchild of Sight and Sound's founders, Katie first stepped onto stage when she was 4 years old, making her the first member of the family's third generation to be a part of the ministry. Throughout her 30-year tenure, Katie has served in various capacities within the company, including human resources, marketing, and business development. Now, as director of marketing and communications, Katie is a member of the brand development team, bringing alignment to each of the brand's extensions through marketing, advertising, public relations, and corporate communication. She also serves as the primary spokesperson for the company, including on-camera host for Sight and Sound TV's live broadcast events. Katie continues to connect Sight and Sound's past to its future, introducing audience members from around the world to the Sight and Sound story. Katie and her husband Brian reside in Lancaster and are raising their three children, now fourth generation, family members acting on the Sight and Sound stage. Katie, how are you doing today?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm really excited to get into all the things we have to talk about. First off is the history of Sight and Sound. Where
Yes.
did it all start?
It's a great question. So my grandparents founded Sight and Sound nearly 50 years ago. We're not quite at 50, but almost. And they grew up right here in Lancaster County. Both of them grew up on farms. My grandfather wanted to be a dairy farmer for his whole life. And then through a set of very tragic circumstances,
Mm.
his mother passed away somewhat unexpectedly. And one day his dad came home and said, I don't want to do this without your mom. And so I sold the family farm. And so he had to found himself young, ready to get married, and without a vocation. And so he began relying on creativity to make ends meet. And through a course of, over several years, he was doing photography, he was painting, he was peddling paintings out of the back of his car. And one night, his pastor asked him if they would perform a slideshow of his photography. So this was in the 1960s, and multimedia was becoming more of a thing. And so they did, and the rest, we always say, like, the rest was history. From there,
Right.
they took the show on the road, and for nearly a decade, they actually traveled throughout the country doing slideshows until they started having children, and they really were ready to just settle down. And one year, they asked themselves the question, do you think people would ever come to us? And a fun little piece of history is actually the very first thing they did was they rented the Lancaster Bible College auditorium for a whole summer
Oh, wow.
and ran their slideshows for 3 months straight. And that initiative provided enough seed money to purchase our first plot of land and build our very first theater. So Lancaster Bible College has a really cool part of our history.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. So from there we grew. They started adding, live actors to the slideshows and music and live animals and all the things that we're known for now, and that eventually helped us grow. We built our where we're at currently in Lancaster here in Pennsylvania. Eventually expanded into Branson, Missouri, and have done a lot of things since then too.
Oh, absolutely. So tell me, where do you come in all of this? Where is your start with Sight and Sound?
My start with Sight and Sound was in the mid 80s. We were down at Living Waters, our very first theater. And I always say, like, I was basically born on the stage one way or another. My mom came into work a couple of days after I was born, and they had a nursery set up in the dressing rooms. They had a second nursery set up in the box office. And it was truly a family affair. And I started performing on the stage when I was between 3 and 4 years old. And I did that until my mid-teens, and I kind of hit a point of going like, I don't know that I like being
Mm.
on the stage very much, and so I kind of walked away from the stage. I did lots of other things throughout the years, everything from working in our box office to with our animals outside in facilities, human resources, and it's been quite a journey now, kind of coming full circle back to being, I'm a part of the brand development team and in charge of helping to lead our marketing efforts and all those types of things. And throughout the last couple of years, I found myself back, not necessarily on stage, but at least fulfilling the role of spokesperson for this season, which is very fun and kind of like life coming full circle again.
So also Sight and Sound, at least the Lancaster location, has had many changes over the years.
Mhm.
The Living Waters
Mhm.
and then rebuilding.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What that process was like for.
Yeah. So when we were at Living Waters, we were there for over almost 50, well, yeah, just over 15 years. And truthfully, like capacity was starting to outpace what we were able to have in the theater. So we were having more people than we could actually hold, and it was a good problem to have.
Right.
And so we expanded to where our current location is in the early 90s, and we were on in that theater was about a 1,400 seat theater for about 6 years. And in 1997, on a day where we didn't have shows, there was some work being done on the stage, and some sparks fell down through the stage into the basement where we had a storage area of set pieces, and they caught on fire from the sparks. And we lost everything that day. We lost the entire theater, almost all of our set pieces. And it was devastating to say the least. I was
Yeah.
13 years
Right.
old. Yeah. I was 13 years old at the time. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, life as I know it is probably over. Like, I don't know. We genuinely weren't sure if we'd be able to come back. And my grandparents had 3 days after the fire what they call the kitchen table conversation. We still
Mm-hmm.
reference it that way. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and my grandfather looked at my grandmother and said, do you really want to come back? We're in our 50s. Like this, we worked really hard. Is this just where we, call it what it is and be done? And they said they sat there for a moment, and my grandma finally said, I don't know if I could ever live with myself another day if we didn't come back. Like, this is not just the job we do, it's the calling on our lives. And so they entrusted it to the Lord. It's like a miraculous story in and of itself because we didn't get insurance money from the
Mm.
fire. And there were some people in the community that came around and said, hey, we're going to help you guys rebuild. We're going to figure this out. And multiple financing groups came together. Some private investors came together to help us rebuild, which was just something we'll be forever grateful for. And yeah, we were able to actually reopen 18 months after the fire, which in and of itself
That's
is, yeah, it's
ridiculous.
ridiculous. Like we always say that even now. It's like, how did that even happen?
That's so ridiculous.
Yeah, so it's, a definite point of God's faithfulness in our story for sure.
That's like building and all, or 18 months, or
Yeah, building and everything. Building the build. We redesigned the building, built a totally different building, rebuilt all of the set pieces that we needed to have built for that show, rehearsed and opened. So the fire happened at the end of January of '97, and we opened in September of 1998.
that is
Yeah, it's kind of astounding.
insane. Yeah, that is. When we say that Lancaster has an heart for the arts.
Yeah, it's true. And the community was amazing. Like that's part of, being in Lancaster and everybody, I don't think until the fire happened, I do not think that we recognized the part we played in just not just the tourism industry in Lancaster, but the industry just,
Whole.
as a whole, the economy as a whole. Yeah. And how many people kind of came out of the woodwork going, what can we do to help? Because if Sight and Sound's not up and running, we're not up and running, and
Right.
we need you guys. It was a very humbling um experience to just have the community as a whole just kind of all gather together and really support us in a really cool way through that time. So,
So from there,
mhm.
where do you guys go? Or do you guys, at that point, I don't imagine you guys would be doing the big shows that you have now, like Ruth or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So in 1998, the only big epic Bible story we had ever done was Noah. So we
Mm.
opened Noah in that other theater. It was called the Entertainment Center. And that was truly the moment where we started to go, oh, there's something to this. Like no one else is doing really big epic Bible stories on stage. And I think that maybe that's what we're called to do. And so Noah, we closed, well, when the fire happened, we reopened the new theater with Noah, and that ran for several years. And then began producing larger Bible stories after that. So yes, Ruth, which performed here at Lancaster Bible College a
Yes.
couple years ago, but Ruth and we did Daniel and Joseph and in the beginning and all sorts of other shows that really kind of helped us get from where we were to where we are today with the shows that that are big and huge and epic like Queen Esther and Jesus and all
Yes.
of these other ones. Yeah.
And that's another fun little tidbit of history that LBC was the first ever organization
Mhm.
outside of Sight and Sound to perform a Sight and Sound production.
Yes, it's very true. It was our first, you guys were, I'll say, our guinea pigs.
Yes.
But truly you were, because it's a conversation we've been having about, do we want to eventually be able to license these shows for other performances like schools and colleges and churches and things like that? And Lancaster Bible College was the first time we tried it, and it was an awesome experience. So everything kind of got put on hold because of COVID. You guys performed it right before we
Right
went into
before.
COVID. But it's definitely a conversation that we're interested in continuing to pursue in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I was a part of that. I was part of the stage crew for that because I
Oh,
was like,
nice.
this is a moment that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, it was very fun. It was
Very
fun to
fun.
come and watch. It was actually a really surreal feeling to come and watch and like just be so familiar with the script and the songs and all of those things, but have it performed in such a different and unique way. It was beautiful. It was really cool.
Thank you. Um, so back to Sight and Sound. That new theater you built had a really big stage.
It did and still does. So we have a 300-foot wraparound stage. There's 2,000 seats in the theater. If you've never been to a Sight and Sound show, we're known for bringing Bible stories to life in an epic way. And so we have a cast of 50 professional actors. We have sets that are 30 to 40 feet high. We have one of the largest LED screens in the entire world that
Mm-hmm.
flies in and out like a backdrop. We have live animals that run up and down the aisles. And the hope and the heart is truly that the audiences that come sit in the heart of the story as it unfolds all around them, and they get to experience the Bible in a very different and unique way.
Absolutely. You can sit in the front part of the theater and you can look to your left and see, oh, there's still stage, and you can look to the right and oh, there's still stage.
Yep.
And it's always, or most of the time, it's mostly in use, all of
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
You can look around, the main characters will be on the stage and there'll be side characters doing their whatever's on the other side, and you just watch and really live in the moment.
Yeah. That's the hope. It's one thing. I think there's so many different ways to engage with the Bible. There's obviously reading it on its own. There's shows and movies that are out there. There's Bible story books. There's podcasts. There's so many different
Hmm.
ways. And the way we get to be a part of the body of Christ is to really hopefully transport audiences back in time and in a way that, we do things in a really big way. Yes. But we never want to do big things just for the sake of doing big things. We truly always want the story and the message to be the thing that shines brightest. And I think our teams do a pretty good job of working towards that end.
So, with that in mind, how do you guys decide what is a Bible story with putting onto stage? Because you mentioned Noah.
Hmm.
Noah's a relatively short story.
Right. It's true. Yeah. So choosing the next Bible story it's actually one of my favorite things that we ever do. And it is not a thing that is taken lightly.
Hmm.
There's a lot of prayer that goes into it.
I'm
There is a
sure.
lot of multiple different teams coming together, both from our like leadership development and leadership team side. And then also our story team, which is our directors, writers, and producers. And a lot of times it's just a really honest conversation with them about, what do you guys feel like the Lord is putting on your heart? What do you have excitement? What stories are rising to the top for you to tell? And it's really been such a cool, so like Queen Esther specifically, it takes, and we can get into this then again later, but it takes almost 4 years to produce a show. So we're choosing a show, 4 years before it's going to premiere, and often not know we have no idea what's going to be happening or in the world around us when that show premieres. And so for
Mm.
Queen Esther specifically, it was probably one of the strongest times for us of going, oh my goodness, like the Lord truly is and does continue to lead us in what we are called to do, because that story premiered in the middle of COVID, well actually right before COVID hit. And it was a story of, a woman being taken from her family, being isolated alone in a palace, a ton of civil unrest as things were unfolding, and knowing that in the middle of all of the unrest, in the middle of all of the isolation, that she was called for such a time as this.
Hmm.
And that story being the story that we were called to tell in the middle of, the world being isolated and the world being pulled away from their families, and the world and so much civic unrest both in our country but the world at large. We could not have planned that had
Right,
we wanted
exactly. Yeah.
to. And it was just such a reflection to us and a testimony of, the Lord leading and guiding the process, and how much he is faithful when you really do surrender your plans to him.
It was incredible because over here in Lancaster Bible College, that day where everything shut down, I think it was like March 13th.
Hmm.
That was the day we were supposed to go to Ireland
Okay.
and do a tour around there,
Uh-huh.
but everything just shut down and got canceled.
Right.
So we got the chance to see Esther,
Hmm.
a rehearsal of it.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
Yes,
a whole group of you came.
yes,
Were you there?
I was
Oh,
there.
that's
Yes.
great. Yeah. Yes.
And what a amazing show to really highlight.
Hmm.
We are here for such a time as this. God is preparing us for such a time as this,
Yeah.
and what a time COVID was.
Yeah, it was. It was the time. I don't know what it was, but it was
it
something.
was it was a moment in history that happened. So after Queen Esther, you got Jesus coming
Mm-hmm.
up.
Yep.
What was it like to build such a gigantic story, probably one of the penultimate characters of the entire Bible,
Yeah.
and putting that to stage accurately without with some artistic interpretation,
Sure.
etc., etc.? How do you do that in a faithful way?
Yeah. We don't shy away ever from saying that we are an entertainment company. So we're
Ooh,
very clear to say we're not a museum. We are not a historical like we want to be accurate, but we are not trying to necessarily prove facts. That's not the thing that we are called to do. There's amazing ministries out there that do that. What
hmm,
we want to do is move people through the power of story. And so, whenever we're producing a show, whether it's David, Queen Esther, Jesus, any of these shows that our teams work together at, the hope is that we are able to include as much actual scripture and actual, events that unfolded in the Bible as accurately as what we possibly can. And as we know, the Bible, there's big gaps sometimes in the
yes,
stories. There's things that are left up to interpretation. And so we do our best to create circumstances, characters that uphold the spirit and the heart of the story without actually detracting from the facts that are there.
hmm,
And so when we have to fill in spaces, we often say it is a creative portrayal of an actual factual occurrence. And so we do absolutely take creative license, but the hope in the heart is that the spirit of the story, the spirit of the message that is, the point of why that story exists in the first place,
right.
that we never detract from that. And so hopefully we do a decent job. I'm not saying we always get it right, but that would be the hope and the heart and the intent.
Yeah, and I must say to fit 3 years of Jesus' ministry, and if you want to plus count the 30 other years
Yeah.
that that precede that, it's a large task,
Hmm.
and I must say that watching because I watched it on live stream when it went out
Hmm.
on live stream,
Hmm.
and it was one of the most touching experiences I've had with anything Bible related.
Yeah, and I think that that's whenever our story team, our directors and writers set out to produce a new show, the first thing that they do is a ton of research. I mean, they
Oh,
are
I'm
not
sure.
just reading scriptures, but listening to podcasts and talking to other experts. And one of the first things that they do is just seek the Lord on what theme is rising to the top. So for Jesus specifically, it didn't take very long for the theme of rescue to rise to the top. And so that became the thread that tied the way that we told the story together. And so any of Jesus's miracles, and yes, they're all rescue, of course, but like any of the story elements that kind of tied to that thread were the ones that we chose to highlight. And I would say the same is true for David. So
Mm,
when our team first set out to produce David, it very quickly they said, this is the story about slaying giants. Like the battle belongs to the
of
Lord.
course.
That's the theme of this show. And while that still isn't it's like a secondary theme. What actually totally blew our minds as our team dove in was that what the theme that actually rose to the top was communion and worship and with God. And so as we started writing David, it became very apparent very quickly that yes, there were battles to be slayed. Yes, the battle belongs to the Lord, but for those things to happen, you have to actually take a step before that and have the relationship in the first place. And so
Mm,
now David unfolds in this really beautiful way and truly becomes um, the story about a man who has surrendered his life to his shepherd. And even when he messes up,
yep.
even when he makes mistakes, that is the anchor that he always comes back to. And that's how he slays giants. That's how he becomes king. All of David's amazing life, all the Psalms, all of it that we're so familiar with stem from that place. And so yeah, so all that to say, like that's a big part of then how we choose to tell the stories and what pieces we pull out. And so, when we decided David is was a harder show to tackle actually than
Mm.
Jesus simply because there's so much about David. We almost had the opposite
So
problem.
yeah.
You have Noah who's like 5 chapters in the Bible and you got to like fill some stuff in. And then you have David who's like there's books and books and books and Psalms and it
Yeah, that's
just
what I'm
never
saying.
ends. And so when they were choosing which pieces to pull, it was the pieces that they pulled to share in this show were all about anything that David was coming back to the Lord as his good shepherd, and that was the theme that kind of guided the choices.
So with David being a shepherd, obviously you have to deal with a lot of sheep.
We have so many sheep in the show. Yes, all of our shows have live animals, but David specifically, there's 27 sheep in every show, and we have 14 understudies for the days that some sheep are, not feeling their best, or they have a vet appointment or whatever. They're our actors too, so they have understudies for their off days.
So here's a question: What we mentioned that you started it really early on.
Mhm.
Why and how?
With the animals.
Yes.
Well, I think it goes back to specifically to my grandfather's farm roots. Like he still has animals
Mm.
today. Like he lives right here in Lancaster and lives on a farm. And although it's not a fully working farm, he has chickens and cows and all sorts of things. He just loves animals. And I think I could be wrong about this. I'm pausing a second, but I think the very first animal we maybe had in the show was a portrayal of Jesus' story, a smaller one years and years ago, and then he wanted Jesus to ride in on a donkey.
Donkey.
Yeah. And so I think that might have been our very first animal that we ever added into the show. Now I'm like going back in my mind, I'm like, were there other ones before that? And it just sort of grew from there. And so it's been quite a journey of yes, starting we used to have one donkey in the show and that was about it. And then it just
We had two donkeys.
and then we had two donkeys, yeah. And then it's just, you get to Noah and all of a sudden, but like Noah really was the where it shifted from having maybe a donkey or two or a pony or a horse. Like I know some of our Christmas shows back in the day had a sleigh ride and a horse would come in. So there was like some smaller things like that. But when we got to Noah, that is when it truly like the animal
So you kinda
piece for
have
us.
to.
You kind of have to. And like the thing is like there's very few Bible stories that don't include animals. So once we
Mm.
made that shift to being fully, about Bible stories and not review style shows like our early years, um, I think that's when things started to change pretty quickly on the animal scene. And now we typically have about 100 animals at each of our locations.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, on your Queen Esther, when an elephant came out onto the stage, I had to look closely. I was like, is that a real
Yeah,
elephant?
and we actually like this is so funny because we care so well for animals. Like they are truly a part of our Sight and Sound family. And when we first premiered Esther and there was photos and some people that came to the show, we actually got some concerned letters saying, it's not really great to have elephants in captivity in that way. They're not
Right.
meant to. And we were like, oh, no, 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 no. He's rubber. It's
Right,
fine.
right. It's a
Yeah.
fully electronic.
Yep.
I was like really concerned for a second. I was like, not that the fact
Yeah.
of that reason, but I was like, how'd they get an elephant into
Yeah.
Saint Sound? How are
Yeah.
they allowed to do that?
Right. No, we're not. So no elephants, no real ones anyway, but it's just, yeah, reflection of the artistry of our team. They do an awesome job.
Clearly, it's full of me, and full of a lot of other people too.
Yeah.
What are some of the craziest animals that you have had?
So most of the time we have like what I call like our core animal
Okay.
cast, which is like our horses and camels and llamas and donkeys and sheep and goats and dogs and birds. Those are like the almost every show has those animals. And then it depends on what the show is calling for. So we used to have a water buffalo. His name was
Wow.
Ferdinand. He was a little bit grumpy, so we ended up rehoming him because he got a little cranky on stage. He didn't really like his moment in the
Mm.
spotlight. And we had one of my actually the more fun ones was when we had Samson on stage. We got these adorable little Pomsky dogs to be the foxes. And they looked like foxes. They were just the cutest things, and they were some of the more fun ones that we've had too. But nothing too crazy or exotic because we always want to be safe and we want to be
Right.
able to, yeah, be able to have the animals themselves having a really good time as well.
Yeah. What are some examples of because there is a lot of things that can go wrong when animals are on stage. I remember watching the dog, I think in Esther, fall off the stage a few times, or they
Yeah,
miss or
yeah,
whatever.
right.
Or when in what is it, Jonah, where the horse has to sit down
Yes,
and
yeah.
it
He didn't
misses,
always,
doesn't
yeah.
always sit down, or a sheep will faint,
Yeah.
or pooping is a problem.
Yep. There's always messes to clean up for sure. Yeah. No, so like the thing is truthfully, the animals they're so incredibly well trained. Like they do their jobs flawlessly almost always. And yes, of course, every once in a
Of
while you
course.
have one that misses its cue or goes to the wrong location or something like that. One of my favorite stories, so my kids are in the cast now and this was like years and years ago. My daughter I think was like 8 or 9 at the time. And the show Jonah was on stage, and there was a flock of birds that flew. And then in the
Mm.
very next scene, there was a production number of like the whole cast dancing on stage. And when she got in the car that night, I said, what was a highlight of your day? And she started like cracking up laughing. And she goes, Mom, it was so funny. She said, a bird didn't fly where it was supposed to. And it kept coming back and just sitting on the stage. And we all came out to do this big dance number. And we didn't want the bird to get hurt. So one of our cast members, his name was Brendan, she's like, Brandon scooped this bird up and held it in his arm and did a whole dance holding this bird until he could walk off stage and give it back to the animal team. So yeah, there's always moments like that, and we laugh about them and move on. It's part of live theater.
Well, yeah, that's awesome. I've had a lot of people from here go to Sight and Sound, obviously. So I've heard stories of like, I just stepped in poop.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
have
it's
to
a
keep,
part of it.
I have to keep going.
Yep. Yep. The show must go on,
Show
even
must
in
go
those
on.
moments.
So, to David, what is, or rather, here's a different question. What has been one of the biggest challenges in blocking?
Mm.
Because you have these big sets with Jonah, you have a giant moving boat, you
Mm-hmm.
have this gigantic whale that comes out into the audience, you have all of these incredible technologies, you have the elephant in Esther. How do you decide what is feasible
Yeah.
versus what you can actually do?
Um, Great question. And if I could direct you to our director of production, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's truthfully, it's an ongoing conversation. I mean, as recently as like the end of last week, I was talking to him and he was just talking about how it is such a challenge. Um, we love technology. We love making things big. We love wowing people, but we always want those things to point to the story. So when they're
Mm,
producing a new show, that becomes the core question of like, we can't do it all. So what are the key moments that we really want to focus on? And then we'll fill in the rest of the show around that.
right.
So when we go into a show like David, it's really easy to be like, well, Goliath. If we're going to put a ton of energy into something, it's going to be
Goliath.
Goliath.
Yep.
For Jesus, it was like, what's going to be that moment? And it was walking on water. We've
Yep.
got to get walking on water, like to blow people's minds.
Yes.
For Samson, it was the temple collapsing.
Yep.
For Moses, it's the Red Sea parting. So most stories have a key element where it's like, that's where we're going to put a lot of our time, energy, and resources. Um, and then yeah, we fill in the rest. And so there's what we call it our production sandbox. So every time we go to produce any creative project, actually, we create what we call a sandbox. And there's four sides to that sandbox. And I'm trying to remember them now. One is budget, of course.
Of
The
course.
other one is timeline. The other one is people resources, and then the last one is just brand standards. Like
Mm.
we have a standard of we want things to be spectacular, we want them to be story driven, we want them to have a realistic quality to them as well. And so once we kind of establish what those sandboxes are, then we get to play within that sandbox to create the show. And so what we are really careful about is wanting to be able to bring some level of consistency, so that it's not like one show requires 30 deck crew and then the next show requires 10 deck crew. Like we have to.
Right.
So there are some things that are in play that actually help to be a guiding light as we produce new shows.
That's awesome.
Excuse
Here's
me.
here's a question. Um, you have a catalog of previous shows that you guys have done.
Hmm.
Would you ever think that you might revisit one or update one? For example, Ruth is
Hmm.
quite an older one of your shows.
Right.
Would you ever visit back and uh, do a remaster of it, shall we say?
Yes, we absolutely hope to be able to do that with some of these stories in the future. I mean, our production quality has changed dramatically over the last 20 years specifically. And, part of making the decision to go to Branson
Mm,
and build another theater there, which is basically identical to the theater here, part of the motivation for that was going, hey, we have like a warehouse of all of these shows and they're just sitting there. How do we continue to spread the gospel, do what we're called to do, and be wise stewards of this, these stories that have been entrusted to us in this way? And so, for us, it is a really big ongoing conversation around, how do we steward well the resources that we have? And so shows premiere here in Lancaster. They get packed up on semi tractor trailers, usually about 50 to 60 of them. They travel to Branson. They eventually come back here to Lancaster. And as we, start to pursue new shows, what shows are next, some of the stories that we've done in the past are absolutely ones that are on the table to consider for the future. Yeah.
it's awesome. And speaking of packing up shows or new shows, you guys have a film. Yeah.
We do. So the last couple of years of our history has been it's been a like a whirlwind, to be completely honest. So to talk about films, I think I have to take like a tiny step back. So
Sure.
2 years ago, we got all the way up to opening day of Queen Esther and had to close because of COVID.
Hmm.
And transparently, that year was a really hard year. Like we had some real heavy conversations of, as you know, it drug on and drug on and drug on, of going, are we going to actually make it out of this? We're not sure. We're having this moment of, well, this has been great. I don't know if we're going to be able to keep doing this. And one of our team members at the time came to us and said, hey, like, what if when we reopen Queen Esther, because so many people that were supposed to come this year can't and still won't be able to, what if we would do a live broadcast of the show? And truthfully, I always say I will eat crow for the rest of my life. But I said, we'll never be able to do that. That's way too big. We can't do it.
Right.
And lo and behold, about 2 months later, we were able to reopen. We reopened at like ridiculously low capacity. So in a
Right.
2,000 seat theater, we opened to crowds of like 250 people, so we could allow space between parties. And we did a live broadcast on a streaming platform that we kind of spun up over the summer, all working from home in our basements. And we did our very first live broadcast of a show. And the it just, I don't know, the way that the Lord works is just, it's just miraculous, because in the same way that we lost everything through the fire, and then we were actually, when we came back, it was bigger and larger and more set up to be able to do the ministry we're actually
More
called to do.
refined.
It was absolutely. And we were able to build around, the type of theater we actually needed to do Bible stories. We had just done Noah. And so when we built again, it was like, we need to do this to be able to accommodate these types of stories. In the same exact way, it felt like in the middle of being closed during COVID, and then this, first spark of an idea to do a live broadcast, um, it became the thing that the Lord used to start to shift everything for Sight and Sound in the middle of being closed and very much starting to be without hope, to be
Right.
honest. And so we did that very first live broadcast. Since then, it's been 2 years, and the online streaming platform, we've had over 1.5 million visitors from all around the world, over 175 different countries. And we've done several live broadcasts since then. And in that same exact moment, we really felt like the Lord had been calling us to grow, but we didn't know what it meant.
Mm.
And we started to feel pulled towards this idea of producing feature films, because there are stories that we believe are waiting to be told beyond the pages of Scripture. So, theaters is called to bring Bible stories to life on stage, but there are other inspiring true stories that we're really passionate about telling. And so, we began in the middle of all of that producing our very first film. It was started out to be a short film, but now it's coming to movie theaters nationwide this December, so just in a couple of weeks. And it's called I Heard the Bells. And another part of Lancaster Bible College,
Yeah.
fun fact, our lead actor, Steve Atherholt, is a professor here at the Bible College. And it was such a really just special opportunity to have him be a part of this project.
So I heard the bells. It's well, before we get into that, I want to ask, what was some of the challenges to create? Because you built the theater to do
Hmm.
theater.
Hmm.
Film and theater, while similar, are very different.
Yeah.
How did you guys have to set up the theater to be able to do a live stream film that looked kind of like well, just like all the other Broadway
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah. It's quite an undertaking to broadcast these shows, because they are, in and of themselves, they're massive. But we have some amazing industry partners that come in alongside of us. And so we had 15 cameras for, anywhere from 12, a dozen to 15 cameras for these live broadcasts. We work with a broadcast company that typically does sporting events and other,
Mm.
they'll do concerts and things like that sometimes, but we've been working with them for years. And in the same way as we used to capture our shows for DVD and things like that, we have had a decent amount of experience in this space. So it wasn't entirely new when we went to the live. It's just different when you're doing multiple takes and you can edit later, versus like true live in
You
the
have,
moment. You
yep.
have to get it right. So it is quite an undertaking. It's days of rehearsals with the cameras to make sure that every shot is just right. But it's one of our favorite things that we do now. Like it to take these shows, people come to us from all over the world, but
Yeah.
for the first time, we're starting to be able to go to them. And so at the top of 2020, this is again like another way that the Lord just works. Before COVID was even a word any of us knew, there was a plot of land that was attached to our property that came for sale, and we really felt called to purchase it. And we were kind of talking about the idea of feature films at that point in time, but we weren't sure how soon or how fast. And so at the end of 2020, going into 21, when we were like, no, it's really time to start producing it, that land that we had purchased actually became our backlot. And so we now have a renovated barn. That's what we call our story barn, which is where we have our kind of like our film's headquarters, if you will. And there's a backlot space of land that we're able to use, and that's what we were able to shift towards then to be able to produce I Heard the Bells.
So I heard the bells. What is it about?
So I Heard the Bells is the true story of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and the set of circumstances that lead up to him writing the famous poem "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day," which now is a
Mm.
song that we all know. So he lived a really, in many ways, a wonderful life until it wasn't. And he experienced some incredible tragedy in the middle of the Civil War,
Mhm.
losing family members, and his whole life honestly kind of fell apart. And he as he maneuvered through that season of his life, he ended up kind of losing his faith in the process too, after so much loss and just so much unrest around him. And it's through I don't want to give the whole story away because you
Right.
got to go see it in movie theaters, but through a set of circumstances, it's the bells on Christmas morning that really come to inspire hope in him and rekindle his faith. And it's just an amazing story. And again, we started all of it, the idea of it and the beginnings of a script before we even knew what the last several years were going to be. And it is a story of loss. It's a story of grief. It's a story of lost faith and lost hope. And then in the midst of tragedy, finding hope again. And I think it's a story that's going to resonate with so many people because of what the last several years have been. There's very few people I know that haven't lost someone or something through what the last few years have been. And so, yeah, we had a premiere just a week ago, and for the first time had a larger group of people see it. And just the stories that have been coming out of just that first screening are astounding to me, and one that we're excited to see kind of hopefully grow significantly as it hits movie theaters in just a couple weeks.
Yeah. So Science on Films. What is the larger project for that? What is the larger mission? I
Hmm.
should say for that.
Yeah. I mean, we continue to say, we've been saying it this way, and I think that it works, but we're passionate about being able to tell stories of people whose lives changed the world because Christ first changed them. And so we want to stay in the vein of true stories, but not necessarily only have them be Bible stories. So I'm not saying we won't ever do a Bible film, but right now that's not the thing that we feel really passionate about. There are so many voices like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who even today, whether we realize it or not, is still affecting, our society. There's so many phrases that we say, like two ships passing in the
Yep.
night, yeah,
Yep. There you
is
go.
attributed to him. And so is a boy's will is the wind's will. Like
Yep.
there's so many. If you Google him and like, famous quotes, you're like, oh, that one was Henry. Oh, that one was Henry. And sometimes we're just so unaware of how these powerful voices from the past are still very relevant today, and their stories are too. And you know, the God's story of redemption doesn't end at the end of the Bible. Like it's
Mm-mm.
continuing
Mm-hmm.
today and it's continued throughout history. And so we feel super passionate about just continuing to tie all of those stories together and hopefully inspire people in the process.
It'd be really awesome to see a film about some of the founding, or at least evangelical church
Mhm.
fathers, like the Wesley brothers,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
the story behind Amazing Grace, which has been done
Yeah,
before,
sure.
but still,
Yeah, there's countless
there's
options. I
countless.
think
It
and
really is.
truthfully, I think it's going to be harder sometimes to narrow down stories for the film side than it is for the Bible because there's actually more of them.
Exactly.
It's endless. So we're excited.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I have a few more questions to ask you, and then we're gonna end off today. First off, what is worship to you?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. I think taking it back to what I personally have learned um, just through the process of watching David unfold on stage, worship to me is just living a life in full surrender to the Lord.
Mm.
And that is such an easy thing to say. It is a much harder thing to
True,
actually live
yes.
out. But to every day say, not my will, but yours. And Lord, I trust you, even in this small thing, even in the big things. Um, but I think that that's where worship really starts to stem from.
It's incredible to think that David was a man after God's own heart, and yet they are such big failures.
Such big feel. Yeah, it doesn't listen, it's the difference. And so my brother Ryan actually was the producer of David, and one of the most profound things that he said, that hit him really, really in a big way was that, both Saul and David um, had really big failures and similar ones in many ways. The difference between the two of them is that when they messed up, one of them ran from God and one of them ran to God. And that's the difference right there. And so, I think for all of us, that, at least for myself, that's my hope, is that even the days that I mess up, even the days that I wish I would have done things differently, or, spoken to my kids differently, whatever
Yep,
it is, that there's grace even for that, and there's forgiveness even for those moments, to come back and say, shoot, I messed up, help me make this right, and help me to continue to grow as a person and who you've called me to be.
absolutely. Because we got to realize that we're not perfect.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely
Right, yeah,
not.
right.
Yeah.
No,
Very far from it,
very,
actually.
very, yes, quite far.
Yeah.
Some might say. Um, so going back to the Lord is always the move, no matter
Hmm.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah. 100%.
what is one of the best pieces of advice anyone has ever given you besides going back to the Lord every time?
Oh my, you ask big questions here at the end. I'll do this. Some of the best advice that I've gotten has been from various family members who, starting with my grandfather actually, and one of his most impactful quotes to me anyway was just, um, allow your gifts to make way for you. I think each of
Mm,
us has a design inside of us, that it's a God-given design, and the best, absolute best thing that we can do, aside from surrendering them to the Lord, is to actually cultivate them and be willing to be okay with what those gifts are. Like, be confident to be who you are, and also be okay with who you're not. Like, don't try to be somebody else. Allow the spark of light that God put inside of you to be the thing that shines in the way that only it can shine through you.
so you're absolutely right. Obviously, be yourself. It really means to be yourself in the context of
Yeah.
who God made you to be.
Hmm.
Um, that's how you're gonna get the most happiness or fulfillment
Hmm.
throughout life, anyway.
Yeah, and it's actually it's dishonoring of God's
God, yeah.
creation when we aren't honoring of what He's put inside of us. That, I think, is one of the biggest things that I've come to learn in the last several years, is just, when we're not willing, it's like, don't hide your light under a bushel. Like, I think
Right.
there's a piece of me that's only now in my almost, I'm not 40 yet, but almost 40. That's only really coming to understand what that truly means, and how honoring of the Lord it is when we allow whatever thing, whatever spark He put inside of each one of us, to be the thing that we allow to come out.
Here's a question: is next year a premiere year for Sight and Sound?
No, next year,
Okay.
2023, we have Moses coming back to the stage, which we're super excited about. It was last on stage in 2014, and it's actually one of my personal favorite shows. So I'm thrilled that it's coming back to the stage next year.
Are there any changes to it, or is it
It'll be pretty much the same as what it was here. We always do some tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it'll be what people remember.
that's awesome? Last question: what are some of the funniest or maybe worst moments that ever happen on stage that
Oh,
you can
good
like?
question. I will tell, this is one of my own personal favorite stories from my childhood. So I will tell you that one, because it's the first one that came to mind. So when, again, back in the 80s, the shows looked very, very, very different than what they do now. And we had a Christmas show. And part of the Christmas show was we had this really fun musical number to a Christmas song that had dancing Christmas trees and dancing snowmen, like basically like the snowy scene comes to life. And
Mm,
these snowmen dance across the stage in a musical number, and the Christmas trees are spinning, and it was just like so fun. But I was, I think, 4 years old, and I had this big fluffy snowman costume on, and a big like heavy fiberglass head. And part of what my part was is I would sit in this little tiny sleigh, and my mom actually would push me out on stage, and she was not dressed as a snowman. She was dressed as just a normal person. But she would sing, that's we're going on a sleigh ride while the snowmen danced around, and I would wave to the audience, and it was very cute and endearing. While I was waiting for my scene every day, there was a gentleman who actually still works for us. His name is Nate. Hi, Nate, if you're listening. Um, and he would sit backstage with me and read me stories as it was time for me to go out on stage. And one day he put my big snowman head on, and he's reading me stories, and I fell asleep in the sleigh, and he didn't know because I have this big head on. And so when they pushed me out on stage and they're singing this song, I apparently fell forward, and when I fell forward, the head fell off and like rolled across the
Oh,
stage. And I was 4 years old, and I slept through the entire scene. Like it was this big snowman, little tiny girl head, popping out of the big snow costume, and I just slept through the whole thing. I never knew it. And so he was no longer allowed to read me stories because they didn't want me to keep falling asleep on stage.
that is really funny.
Yeah. So many, many more where those came from, but some of our best stories are from the earliest days just because they were such unique stories to begin with. But yeah.
So be sure to go see David. It's being played throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, David runs through New Year's Eve, and we have very limited seats left. We're almost totally sold out for the rest of the year. So if you haven't seen it yet, you like have a couple of days yet probably to get your seats before there's nothing left.
And be sure to go see I Heard the Bells as well.
Hmm.
Their premiere film, feature film to
Yes,
come
yep,
out.
feature film on December 1st in movie theaters nationwide.
With all that said, this has been The Story Podcast. My name is Corey Rosen. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to like, subscribe, share with all your friends, and stay tuned for, excuse me, this Saturday we have an awesome, super awesome guest, Mr. Sam Schmithuber, and he is a Nashville recording artist from here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So I'm really excited to talk to him about his career. With all that said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you guys later. Bye.